The sun was sinking low over the New Mexico plains, painting the sky in streaks of copper and blood orange, when Thomas Grady realized he might lose everything his father had ever built. The drought had burned the earth dry for months, the cattle were dying, and the river that once cut through his land like a silver ribbon had become a bed of cracked clay. He had stood there on the ridge that evening, his hat in his hand, watching the last of his herd stagger near the fence line, ribs sharp against hide. A man could lose his heart to the land, and Thomas had, until it betrayed him. He had written letters to the bank begging for time, sold his horses, even pawned his mother's wedding ring. But now the ranch was one sunrise away from foreclosure, and all he could do was watch the wind carry dust through the open gate. Then he saw her. She came out of the canyon like a whisper of the past, dark braids glinting in the dying light, her horse sure-footed among the stones. The girl was young, but there was something ageless about her eyes, the way they held both kindness and sorrow. She wore buckskin and carried a bundle across her saddle. When she stopped near the fence, Thomas called out, wary. "You lost, miss." She shook her head slowly. "No, I came because your land cries." Her voice was soft but steady, accented with the cadence of the Apache tongue. He frowned, thinking she must be some drifter or perhaps a neighbor's hand. But she dismounted, walked toward the fence, and placed her palm against the earth. "There's water still here," she said quietly, deep under the dry skin. "My grandfather taught me where it hides." Thomas almost laughed, not out of cruelty but despair. "Miss, I've dug a dozen holes and hid nothing but dust." She met his eyes, unflinching. "Then you were digging in the wrong place." That night, against reason, he handed her a lantern and followed her into the canyon. She moved like she belonged to the night, tracing her steps by stars he couldn't see. They stopped near a cluster of mesquite trees, and she pressed her hand to the ground again. "Here," she whispered, "dig here before the sun rises." He wanted to tell her it was hopeless, that hope was a cruel thing when the land was dying, but something about her certainty made him pick up the shovel. By dawn, they had struck damp soil. Then, a few feet deeper, the ground turned to mud, and water trickled between his fingers like a miracle. He sank to his knees, laughing and crying at the same time. "I'll be damned," he said, voice cracking. She smiled faintly. "No," she said, "you are blessed." The spring they uncovered became the ranch's lifeline. Within weeks, Thomas's cattle drank again, the grass began to green, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. He built a small trough and fenced off the spring, but every morning the girl returned, checking the flow, whispering prayers in her language. Her name was Naya. She lived with her grandmother on the far side of the canyon, descendants of the people who once roamed those lands long before fences or deeds. When Thomas offered her money, she shook her head. "We do not sell what the earth gives freely." He insisted on at least letting her take supplies, flour, sugar, cloth, but she accepted only coffee for her grandmother. Over time, she became a part of the ranch's rhythm. Thomas found himself watching for her horse's silhouette against the horizon, her laughter mingling with the sound of wind through the cottonwoods. He had known many women in his youth, bright smiles from the saloon, proper ladies from town, but none who spoke with such calm strength. She could mend a fence, calm a spooked horse, and tell stories of the land as if the stones themselves had voices. When she talked, he listened, not out of politeness, but because her words felt true in a way the world rarely was anymore. But not everyone shared his gratitude. When word spread that the Apache girl had found water on Grady Ranch, the town started whispering. Some called it witchcraft, others said he'd made a fool's bargain. The banker who came to renegotiate his loan warned him quietly, "These people bring trouble, Tom. Keep your business separate." Thomas had clenched his fists, biting back anger. "She saved my land," he said. "You remember that before you talk about trouble." But prejudice runs deep, and soon someone poisoned one of his calves, leaving a crude feather stuck in its hide, a false sign meant to turn suspicion toward her. When Thomas found Naya at the spring that evening, she already knew. "They think I did it," she said softly. "Your people always fear what they do not understand." He knelt beside her, his voice tight. "You are my people now, Naya." She looked at him then, truly looked, and for a long moment neither spoke. The space between them felt fragile, like a thread stretched across a canyon. "Be careful with words like that," she whispered. "They can mean too much." The next days were tense. Thomas rode into town to confront the men who'd spread the rumors. Fists flew in front of the general store, and when he returned home with blood on his lip, Naya scolded him gently, pressing a cool cloth to his face. You cannot fight hate with fists, she said. It grows stronger when you feed it. Then how do you fight it? He asked. She smiled sadly. By living without it. Weeks turned to months, and the drought finally broke. The river returned, swelling with snowmelt, the fields bloomed, and for the first time in years, Thomas felt the ranch breathe again. But the joy was shadowed by an unease in town. The railroad company wanted to buy out his land for expansion, and the banker warned that refusal would bring consequences. Thomas stood firm. The land wasn't just dirt anymore, it was sacred now, tied to something greater because of her. One night, the sky split open with thunder, and lightning set the northern pasture ablaze. Thomas rode into the storm, shouting orders to his men, but the wind turned fierce, driving fire across the fields. He thought he had lost everything when he saw Naya on horseback, racing through the smoke, driving the herd toward the river. She coughed from the ash, eyes burning, hair streaked with soot. Get back, he yelled, but she ignored him, pushing her horse harder. When the fire finally died, half the pasture was gone, yet the cattle lived, and Naya lay unconscious near the riverbank, her hands burned raw. He carried her to his house, his heart pounding with terror. For 2 days she hovered between life and death, her grandmother chanting prayers beside her. Thomas barely slept, sitting by her bed, whispering words she couldn't hear. On the third morning, when her eyes fluttered open, he felt his chest break with relief. You should have let me handle it, he said softly. She smiled weakly. And let your heart break again. I could not. When she healed enough to ride again, he took her to the ridge where it had all begun. The land stretched white and green, dotted with wildflowers, the spring glistening below. I wanted to show you, he said quietly. What you saved. She looked at him, her gaze gentle but steady. I did not save it alone. The land chose to forgive you. He took her hand then, rough palm against soft skin, feeling how small and strong her fingers were. Then I owe both of you, he murmured. More than gold, more than words. She shook her head, smiling. You owe me nothing, Thomas Grady. That's where you're wrong, he said. You saved my land, Naya. But you also saved me. He tried to hide his feelings, but the truth was too strong to keep buried. She had become the rhythm of his days, the quiet voice in the wind, the reason he looked toward sunrise. One evening, he found her sitting by the spring, the light soft around her face. Naya, he began, voice trembling. I know our worlds were never meant to meet. But I don't want mine without you in it. She turned to him slowly, her expression unreadable. You speak of love, she said. But love is not a gift to give, it is a fire to keep alive. Can you carry it through the storms that come? If it's for you, he said simply, I'll carry it through anything. Their bond grew in the quiet ways that matter most, shared work, laughter, the comfort of silence. Yet the world outside still whispered. One afternoon, a group of railroad men rode in, demanding he sign over the property. When he refused, they burned his barn and left threats carved into the gatepost. Naya urged him to leave with her, to start anew beyond the mountains, but he refused. My father's bones are in this soil, he said. I can't run. Then I will stand with you, she answered. Together, they rebuilt. Each nail, each plank, was a testament to resilience. The townsfolk who had once sneered began to soften, seeing the devotion between them, the way they worked side by side without pride or shame. The old banker came one morning, hat in hand, offering fair terms for the land. You've proved something, Grady, he said. That decency doesn't come from color or creed, it comes from the heart. Years later, the Grady ranch thrived again, watered by the same spring Naya had found that first desperate night. The fields were greener than they'd ever been, the cattle strong, the river clear. Thomas and Naya stood on the porch watching the sunset, her head resting on his shoulder. He still remembered that first time he saw her, riding out of the canyon like a dream. You know, he whispered, I used to think this land was my whole life. But it was just waiting for you to make it worth living. She smiled, tracing her fingers along his arm. The land gives, the land takes. But sometimes, she said softly, it gives back in ways we never expect. And when the last light of day faded behind the hills, Thomas kissed her forehead and closed his eyes, knowing that love, like water, runs deepest where it's least expected, and that some debts of the heart can never be repaid, only cherished.